Good evening and welcome back to Legal Tech Live. I'm Nick Rishwain today with my co-host for the future, Hana Zumout, and for the first time on the show, because as long as I've known him, the show's been on hiatus, we're bringing in Nathan Walter, founder and CEO of Briefpoint. Nathan, welcome aboard. Good to finally have you on the show, have the show back to be able to have you on.
I am honored to be the first guest back, and I look forward to sort of being, like everything's going to get better from here. Every guest is going to get better.
Of course.
It's going to be a really good trajectory for you guys. I'm really excited to start things up.
And that's going to be hard for the other guests, but I appreciate it.
Let's see how this goes first.
Yeah, that's true. Good. Nathan, you've been around for a while. I met you back at Stanford in, 21 or something like that, 22. I don't know. It's been a while now. Tell our audience a little bit about Briefpoint if they don't know it. Let's assume they don't know anything about it, what you guys do and what your goal is.
Yeah, I mean, I could go through the founder's story. I think that sort of helps frame things a little bit.
I think so.
I was a litigation attorney. I practiced and I was doing mostly defense work and a little bit of plaintiff stuff too. But I initially, when I went to law school, I wanted to get into public defense. And
Okay.
I thought, when you go to law school, you have these lofty ideas of how you're going to be like an officer of the court. So I went to law school and then I was like, I'm going to get in public defense. And then I worked at the DA's office to understand the prosecutorial mechanics before doing public defense work, so you sort of understand how the other side works. And it was immediately way too gruesome, literally too gruesome. I did bite off a little more than I could chew. I was clerking for the LA's DA's hardcore gang unit, which was a sort of, we worked with the DOJ and sometimes like the FBI on prosecuting gang related homicides in LA County. And it's just like so much gore. I realized I wasn't strong enough really to do that on a day-to-day basis. And not
Was that like that? Boy, I really loved Law and Order growing up.
Yeah.
And thought I had the stomach for it, but then when we see it in real life, it's a different story.
I shouldn't know. Like I can't watch Saw the movie.
There were indications.
But I had seen like all the action. I was like, I watched The Predator.
Yeah.
I can handle crazy stuff.
Yeah.
But that was really wrong. I probably should have known. And I have a ton of respect for everyone that does that. It's a really hard work and so important. And so I was like, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go into civil litigation. Stakes are high, but not as high. And I still held on to this idea in my practice that, okay, even though I'm doing civil litigation, I still think I can bring about justice in some fashion for my clients, and you always take your client's side. And yeah, you get to that, but there was a common, almost trope, where at a certain point in litigation, the attorney's fees are just too much. At a certain point in litigation, there is a point where attorney's fees eclipse the amount that is at issue. And if it ever crosses that point, there's no going back. You can't just turn off a lawsuit, right? And it's just pure financial attrition.
Yep.
And because that is so problematic, before we get to that, we'll say, hey, this case, at the very outset, we'll say, hey, you're only getting sued for $100,000. It's going to cost way more than that to pay any attorney to prove you don't owe that money. So you're the business person, make the business decision. And, generally it's more prudent to settle, even if you know you didn't do anything wrong, or even if you are deserving of recovery on the plaintiff side, but it's too up in the air and discovery would be too burdensome. And so I kept
discovery and God forbid a trial, right?
Yeah. Trials are like, I think the general policy was like, if it's less than $3 million, you probably shouldn't go to trial.
Point? Yeah. Why would you do it to yourself?
It's
throwing good money after bad.
Yeah. And then listen, the trial process, the judicial system works a lot more than people think it does. The jury system works a lot more than people think it does. We hear about when it doesn't work, so we have a little bit of selection bias, but even then it's expensive.
It's expensive. Yeah, I'm not saying anything about it not working. It is an expensive process.
Yeah, it is. Even with all of that said, it is still incredibly risky. Yeah. And I kept running into this, and then I felt guilty billing my clients because I felt I was like, okay, well, if we're doing what's right, we should just do it for the sake of doing the right. But my billable hours were such that I had to charge per hour. And so I was sort of not aligned with my client's incentives of coming to like an efficient trial. And then my firm's minimum billables were in conflict of that. And it culminated, this is a mediation I've talked about like many times, but basically had a mediation one day, small case. It was like some construction contract dispute. Opposing counsel legitimately had no case. And we spent 8 hours in this very sweaty, small mediation room. So it was like hot. Everybody's sleeves are rolled up and we're just, all opposing counsel is doing is saying, okay, what about this? Or what about that? Or what about this? And then we were there with, the receipts saying, okay, no. This went on for 8 hours until at the 8th hour, his final sort of his pitch, I was like, oh, well, my client would never agree to that. And then I showed the email where there was express agreement to whatever he said. And opposing counsel broke down in tears. Well, not like kind of sobbing. He was like, I worked so hard in this case. He was definitely crying.
Well, at 8 hours, just on stamina alone, that's a long day.
Yeah, maybe he just needed water.
I'm going to give him a little break.
He's his legs are cramping up on the second half.
Yeah.
So he's like, does that everyone in the room? It was me, the partner and the mediator. We're looking at each other like, what the hell? This is not normal. And it's not normal. The client wasn't in the room. I don't know how he would act if the client was there.
Yeah.
But he gathered himself and he says, I don't care. He's like, I'm going to go to court. I'm going to bang my fists on the table and you're going to be begging to pay the $100K that I'm asking for today. I'm not going to give it to you unless you take this right now. And that sort of mechanism, the bleed dry tactic, the sort of using litigation as a weapon, is something that is rarely spoken between counsels, never spoken between counsels, rarely spoken amongst a firm, because it's just not an ethical pursuit. Right. And when he verbalized that, it was enraging because it's just like, okay, this is so wrong on one hand. And then on the other hand, he was right. And he walked away with that money. And then I walked away basically deciding that I needed to do something about this. And that something was Briefpoint. And the Briefpoint automates.
This was to remove, so your answer to some of this, what everybody loves calling lawfare today, right?
Lawfare, yeah.
Yeah, that's the new catchphrase for litigation.
All the Gen Z kids are saying it.
Yeah, they love it. So we should definitely put that in the imagery on us to seem cool. Yeah. So that your solution to this discovery aspect, discovery being the most expensive part of litigation prior to trial.
Yeah, it can be the most expensive, certainly, especially with document review, but even approaching that, it's just the easiest thing to use to bleed your opponents dry, right? Because you can force them, like by default, they have an obligation to respond to discovery, assuming it's not served improperly, etc. They have a duty to respond. So you're imbuing on opposing counsel a duty to answer a question. Therefore, that opposing counsel needs to get the question. They need to format the Word document. They need to look for the answer in the files. They need to call the client. They need to get the answer to that question. That takes time. So you ask another question, and now that's more time. So you can ask 100 questions, and you can keep asking questions and getting extensions and declarations for additional discovery. And there's obviously limits in many states, but still it can be a huge slog, and you can really demolish a litigation budget early on in a case with discovery because it's so easy just to write another question. It's like 1,000 times easier to write the question than it is to answer one. So Briefpoint is really designed, our goal is to just eliminate discovery off the face of the earth. That was what I saw as like the number one lever. It's hated by attorneys. It's drudgery. It's intense drudgery in that it's kind of like, imagine like you're a surgeon and you're performing surgery on a giant and you're sewing up a critical cut down the giant's leg. I've never done this metaphor before. So
let's see if it works out for you.
Buckle up. It's probably not gonna make sense. No, let's
see if it lands.
It's really critical that you like sew together like the cut and you do it right, because otherwise the giant's gonna die. But you have this whole mile-long leg, and it's exhausting because every single stitch, every rote thing you do is still critical. So it's intense rote work where it's not actually intense. it's just repetitive work that you can't really just cruise by. Some people do. And if you use Briefpoint, you always will. But
there you go. I like it.
But I'm not going to make this an advertisement. You have to like really pay attention, and it's exhausting, and everybody hates it. And it also sucks that your opposing counsel is the one that's forcing you to do this, right?
Yes.
So that's our goal. We do discovery response automation to eliminate that. And then we also do liability mitigation or exposure mitigation. We do discovery governance as well. So because we can automate the responses, we can also sort of distill a corporation's or a client's or a plaintiff in a mass torts sort of response strategy, and then reapply that across many cases involving the same nucleus of facts. So for corporate clients, they have a defective product. They need to make sure that they're answering all the allegations related to that product the same in every state. We can do that automatically. Corporations that have terms of use that they're getting sued on a lot, all that stuff, that there's like a governance component, and that's in addition to our automation components.
Okay. All right. That's great. I'm going to turn it over to Hana for a question now, if she, because I don't want to take up everything, but I do want to go back to a little bit on discovery that will tell her about the headaches of this. But Hana, let's follow up with a question for Nathan.
Yeah. So, I mean, I before this call, I think it was maybe last week, I did listen to your episode on Law Next, and I understand that you're self-taught. So in building Briefpoint, what was the most difficult part of the product development side?
Well, so the self-taught coding, which, by the way, I haven't read a single line of code that I've written in 3 years, but it's sort of a dying thing. The most difficult part was really just learning how to be a business owner, because I was a practitioner. I still consider myself to be a practitioner, and going from that to then doing things that people usually get an MBA to do. Like there's acronym soup. You have your alphabet soup where it's just like, okay, ARR, NRR, you've got, cost of goods and all of these acronyms and things. So I just had to read and learn about all this stuff, because when I was dealing with investors or other things, they expect you to know all of that, and you need to know that to run a startup. So learning how to run a startup was probably the most challenging, just to become proficient enough to be able to strategize and move and understand what the rules were, so that if I needed to break the rules, I could understand why and to what end. That was pretty difficult.
Well, that's like, for us, law school is a new language for most of us, right? You're learning largely a new language. And what you just described, I've got a little bit of a history in finance, but venture capital finance is different from regular finance, right? So their accounting and the numbers that they look at are significantly different than what you might look at if you're looking at a publicly traded company.
Oh, absolutely.
So you had to learn a whole new language for a specific subset of finance to run a specific type of business within this space.
Yeah. And luckily lawyers are kind of equipped to we have the core skills to take a fact and then dress it in the light most favorably for your position. So in that sense, lawyers do have the building blocks that are really helpful when raising money from a venture capital or raising money just writ large, right? From seed investors and everything else. So we do that, but you have to care about that, though. Because being a practicing attorney, I care about the law, about maxing out my intelligence, and then you have to learn these accounting principles, which seems kind of ethereal. So you do need to care, and you only care about that kind of stuff if you care about the underlying mission of what you're doing, and that is so important for anyone that wants to start a company. If you're starting a company because you think it's going to make you rich, that is going to be much harder than if you're going to start a company because you deeply care about solving the problem the company's setting out. Because if you're just doing it for rich, everything is annoying to deal with. But if you're doing it to do the mission, and you see, okay, this task or learning X or learning Y is aligned with that goal, you're going to go a lot further. You're going to get burned out way less easy.
The business side is the must, right? You have to learn the business side, but it is not the fun side generally.
I mean, it's fun when you have a ton of money.
Speaking of
Yeah,
which,
that
I'm sure you'll be happy to take a ton of money, right, Nathan?
Oh, yeah.
If somebody's handing out a ton of
if
money.
anybody wants to buy my company and they have 40, 50 bucks, I'll take 30, honestly. Like exit it, we are a point solution. So strategically, or realistically, point solutions don't IPO. And so
right.
Exit is certainly on the horizon. The question is, when do you want to exit? And generally the rule of thumb in legal tech is somewhere around 5 million ARR with 120% NRR. So you have really solid growth expansion, and you have solid, churn rates that are not too high, nowhere above like 14% or so, or 10%. Like timing is really important. And timing played much bigger of a role than I anticipated. Just, you have to strike while the iron's hot. And what I learned was that the iron being hot is a time that you might not want to raise. You want to raise money when you have an up.
Sure.
And you might want to do that even if you don't necessarily need the money, because that money is going to keep that thing going up. And so there's a lot of strategy. Like Max from Legora, the CEO of Legora, he would text someone, a VC late at night, and be like, hey, I got the term sheets. I'm going to close tomorrow. Are you in or out? And that's how he raised money. Now, that is a very advantaged position. I couldn't get away with that. We're too small.
Yeah, he's also raised quite a bit of money.
Tons of money. If you're hot, you can play ball. And then it's just all the strategies are really interesting. And watching them and how they're positioning themselves has been pretty fascinating.
There's a lemming effect in Silicon Valley or in the investors where, in my experience, now this is pre-2020, 2021, but there seems to be, when somebody is hot, everybody else piles in.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of due diligence, and we've certainly seen that in some massive failures, not just in legal tech, but beyond. We've seen that a lot of investors won't do a ton of due diligence if somebody's hot enough. And sometimes that blows up spectacularly. Sometimes it works out well for the investors. But
and the investors, like the lemming effect, you can call it a lemming effect. I think that maybe perhaps more sympathetically, it's the same for attorneys as it is for investors.
Sure. Buyers in general, probably.
Yeah, they're just motivated more by fear than greed.
Yeah.
Even investors.
Yes, the FOMO effect.
Exactly. But for investors, it's FOMO, right? It's like they don't want to look dumb, and attorneys don't want to look dumb. So investors don't want to invest in a company that didn't check all the boxes and it failed, because they're like, well, I probably should have had that box checked. At the same time, if there's so much demand for this thing, they don't want to be dumb when they had this opportunity to invest and they missed it. Yeah. In the same sense for attorneys, you don't want to take a risk on a low value case that is going to cost a ton. You don't want to change the way you practice if you've been practicing for 20 years and it's worked fine. And the only difference between then and now is other people are telling you should adopt AI. There's a lot of fear-based motivations. I don't think that's wrong necessarily, but there are psychological similarities between the two groups.
Yeah. And I think that's not uncommon. You're probably experiencing this now. It's not uncommon with buyers either, right? If I hear that Hana likes this tool, and then Hana and Nathan both like this tool, and boy, they're raving about it, and then, well, maybe I'm just more now my risk averse nature or my fear of jumping into that tool, paying for the 1-year contract or whatever, decreases.
And that's what we saw with Harvey. Really did a great job with that, because before Harvey, there were maybe 40 legal tech companies. Well, before ChatGPT, there's 50 legal tech companies. Now there's over 1,000. And that's LTH's most recent report. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. But before the legal tech world, before ChatGPT, or really before ChatGPT, and even before Casetech's exit, where they exited for $650 million, no one would invest in legal tech.
Right.
And The reason was that there was not a scalable enterprise motion, because every large AM Law 100 firm, and by the way, enterprise in law, there's like 50 law firms that have more than 3,000 attorneys, and 3,000 is usually the standard for enterprise and your normal B2B SaaS around there. Everyone has, but like it's a different market, but like enterprise is just larger firm, right? Larger firms buy differently. They all have different procurement processes. It's not like everyone in the procurement team in the law firm went to procurement school like normal B2B SaaS.
Yeah, you don't have a specialist in
right.
that.
They're an attorney that got assigned this job, or a librarian or IT procurement who's normally, you know, fixing routers and powering computers on for their attorneys is now like, oh, so everything's different. And so VCs were always hesitant to do that. And because of that, so many legal tech companies in my class and the class before, they all went after these white whales and said, we're going to crack enterprise. And they failed. And they died waiting on those deals to close because, you know, maybe the champion who's like, I want to make this work, didn't have the political sway. If you're selling to a practice group like litigation or transactional, the litigators sort of have to convince the transactional partners that, hey, you know, you should pay for this too. So there's a lot of politics, and it wouldn't work. It just wasn't working. It was not a viable play. Clio started SMB, Briefpoint started SMB because of that, in large part, I imagine. And then Harvey came out, and Harvey's webpage just was a masterclass in hype. And I'm not saying they haven't delivered on that. I think they have an incredible program. They have great leadership, but they got hype. They had the knowledge. They had, like, you know, their co-founder was ex-Google, right? And they were able to capitalize on the hype and lock down the enterprise in a way that no other legal tech company ever has. And making my way back to your point, that first couple of big law firms, those were the dominoes. And now Harvey's billions and billions of dollars, right?
That's right.
And so, like, people like to sort of brush off Harvey as like, oh, it's a pure, like, they really actually did something incredibly special in legal tech, even under the circumstances.
They had an exception. Mike Whalen even just wrote on this today. He you know, they captured inside some big firms very early on, which is, whether it's hype or, but that's a success that they were able to achieve, whether they had just through networking, right? Networking, and that's pure selling ability, which I'm sure you realize, being a business owner now, that you are a salesman as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, I worked as a cold call.
Oh, that's right. You worked for Ironclad.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you learned the sales before you did it for your own company.
Yeah.
But that's what I see from the very, very early stages, that and being in the right place where they got some early pretty significant funding and support, they were able to build at least a fence, if not a moat.
I mean, moat's interesting. You know, moat's a tough question.
It's a tough question in AI, I think. But.
Yeah, because, I mean, what's the moat for anything anymore?
Right.
And I don't mean that to brush the question off. I think we should talk about it. But well, let's go to the core of legal revenue.
Let's wait there, because I want to dig in on that, because we've also seen this reduction in costs, right? As the foundational models get better and more competitive. So Hana had a marketing question.
Yeah.
That she's the expert on that. So I wanted to let her get in on the marketing aspect of things.
Let's talk about it.
Well, kind of like the outreach that you're talking about, how like you'd also be a salesperson, you're wearing a lot of hats. So when you were creating Briefpoint and you were trying to raise funding, exactly were you doing that? Like, what were your methods?
Yeah, I mean, they say do things that don't scale when you're starting a company. Like, do things that cannot be replicated at scale, and then the sort of the subtext is because you're not going to be able to compete with the people that are already doing that. Right. So in light of that, I basically created these fake programs, these vaporware programs, where they were effectively complicated PowerPoint presentations. It was Adobe XD, if anyone's familiar, but they were complicated PowerPoint presentations where instead of going to the next slide, you press a button on the screen and it takes you to another slide, but it looks like a program is running, but it's purely smoke and mirrors. And I spun up these things because I needed to, number one, determine if there was an appetite in the market for Briefpoint. I needed to A/B test different versions of the product with different angles. And I needed to get letters of intent to get on to get an early investment. And so what I did was I looked up bar numbers in California. And on the California bar website, everyone is a bar number. The first attorney was presumably number one. I'm number 313,299. And it's ordered sequentially. So I looked up the age of, okay, what's somebody, the average age of a law firm owner, and it was like 45, 55. And I looked up when what their bar number was, and it was about 200,000. So then I looked up bar number 200,000, and a name pops up, and it has a phone number, and I'd call them, and I would try to get them to sit down for a demo of Briefpoint. And I just did that one after another. I did that, honestly, like over 1,800 times easily.
Oh, wow.
And there's something here. I needed to suss out technological feasibility, so I posted fake job postings on like Upwork for engineers. And
so it's dark patterns is what you're using here.
Dark patterns?
Yes. Have you heard? You've never heard this phrase, or
no?
It's dark patterns.
It's a little vapor, like you said, vaporware. But generally, a dark pattern is that where you try to opt out of something and you can't, and or so it's being a little sneaky with the code.
Yeah, and like I don't think it was immoral.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding with you.
No. I mean, it was. I mean, maybe it was Machiavellian, but I think that
you're testing.
I had to, right? Because
you have to. It's
in
market
life,
research.
You don't get many at bats for entrepreneurship. You maybe have, depending on how successful they are, you only maybe a dozen if you're really working and you start young. Obviously, if they fail immediately, then you have more iterations, but you don't have a lot of at-bats. And what can happen is if you start something that's not very thoughtfully approached, you can become a slave to your own company. And you can sort of be burdened by your company because you set this thing up that you can no longer stop. You shove a ball or a sort of a boulder off the top of the hill, and you're sort of stuck with it. And so I needed to make sure that there was something there before I would ultimately spend every dollar I've ever made and set everything on my life in fire to keep it warm. And so whatever means necessary in that context.
I think that's important.
Yeah.
Like you're doing this out of survivability. I'm giving you a hard time because that's fun for me. But
we really need to dig into your psychology, Nick.
yeah. That's going to be for a whole different podcast. I'm giving you a hard time for the laughs, but that's really a survive. You're trying to survive. You're doing everything you have to survive at this point.
Yeah, and you got to stay afloat. You got to get early traction. I use those LOIs to get an accelerator to help us build, and I would go door to door at law firms with donuts, and I had the whole spreadsheet, and I was like, I'm going to hit every law firm in Orange County. And I would go to the law firm, and because if you have donuts, you're saying, hey, I'm dropping off donuts. They're used to that from larger providers. Mm-hmm. And I'd walk in, try to make conversation and drum up stuff like that. And then I created AI SDRs effectively, where I ultimately got into, sequencing. And then when we had access to ChatGPT, drafting those emails, automated outreach and that kind of stuff before it got too big, which was really lucky. Getting the SEO play down early on was huge because this was before AI generated content. So when the new chat models were ingesting data, they knew about Briefpoint, but not the new competitor because they had ingested the data at a time where Briefpoint had a ton of articles and they didn't.
Interesting. That was by design, or that was kind of a lucky?
No, I was lucky, for sure.
That's all right. Good.
Yeah, and it's tough. It's tough. It's exciting to start a business, but it is really hard, right? I often do 8 a.m. to 1 a.m. days, and I think a lot of legal tech runs 996. So that's 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Saturday, and it's insanely competitive, and you have to move really fast. And people say that social lives and life outside of the work is important, and that's true.
Yeah.
But if you want to be a top performer and if you want to get institutional money, you sort of need to be a top performer. You need to make trade-offs, and you need to be pretty clear about that with the people in your life. And so, when I was working at Ironclad, for example, I did did Ironclad. I basically the reason I did Ironclad sales was because I ran out of money setting up Briefpoint. I had literally $600 in my bank account, 15K in credit card debt, and I had rent coming up, and I was living foolishly in Newport Beach, California. And I was like, okay, well, I need to pay rent. So I was like, okay, do I go back to law to develop more money and then come back with more gusto, or do I learn how to sell tech to attorneys? So I joined Ironclad to sort of learn how, at the time of really rapidly accelerating Silicon Valley legal tech company was operating. So from,
because they were going gangbusters.
Yeah, no, huge. And they had all the talent from Salesforce. And so from 8:30 a.m. to 3 p.m., I would just do cold calls for Ironclad. And then 3 p.m. to 10 p.m., I did Briefpoint. And I did that for a year and 7 months, effectively every day. I have not taken a vacation other than visiting like my fiance's family in over a decade. And that's just like the bare minimums, basically. Like you need to do that.
I've always had a problem with the work-life balance concept. Not that it's a bad concept. It's that the work-life balance depends on what it is you're trying to achieve.
100%.
If you're looking to have a real work-life balance, you're probably looking for the 8 to 5 position.
If
right?
you don't own more than 10% of the or more than, let's say, okay, that's dramatic. Let's say if you don't own a percent of the company, or like even a tenth of a percent is huge, honestly. If you don't have like a vested ownership stake in a company of some form, and that company can be like a huge payout for you and you care about it, then I think work-life balance is really important, right? Because you're saying, hey, like I have other interests. I'm using work as a paycheck. That is totally valid, and try to find happiness in the way you can, but at the same time, don't kill yourself in this pursuit. Like I don't expect my employees to be up as late as I am.
Right.
I also benefit from, if I need to, I can ask them to do something, and I would never ask them to do something I wouldn't do myself or haven't done already. But the work-life balance, like if you're an entrepreneur, there's no work-life balance.
It doesn't exist.
Nobody asks the Olympics athletes, the gold medal, like, well, how much vacation time were you able to get in? Like, were you a great parent to your kids, during trials?
Things suffer, yeah. Other aspects of life suffer, yeah.
Yeah, and especially in legal tech. I mean, we're moving at 1,000 miles an hour. We have a massive existential threat that looms above us, and tons of money firing into all engines, and it's very intense, and you got to be ready for that, and it's exciting. So right, like it's not all bad. It's good.
No, it's good. Yeah. If you're driven to do those things. So I'm really impressed with the marketing aspect of that. It's a great question that you asked, Hana, because you did the cold calls, you did the door-to-door salesman thing, and then you blended into funnels. But it sounds like you were going for user feedback from the early stage, and that's why you had to do the cold calls and the door-to-door stuff.
Exactly. We needed
just to get people who were testing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think if anyone's starting a legal tech company now, like that's the market appetite is something that you really need to focus a lot on. I see many legal tech companies that are solving pains that don't exist, and
that's always been the case in legal tech. It may be the case in all tech. I'll give us a break, but certainly I've seen that multiple times in legal tech.
Yeah, and then also, like, if you're not a practitioner, user feedback is going to be necessary throughout your entire process. I generally wouldn't recommend solving pains that other people have just as a rule, just because that kind of distance can make for surprises in later on. So you have to really make sure that you're thinking a lot before starting anything.
There's a difficulty here for our viewers. I'm not coming at this with entirely closed eyes, even if I'm a little rusty, but there is an issue with users in the legal space who want custom things done, and you can really easily get into feature creep with requests that, well, I'd like to see it done this way, and then somebody else, they do it that way, and you're talking workflows really rather than the solution that you're offering.
Yeah, I mean, yes, the market wants to pull you horizontal, right?
Yeah.
And I take that as a compliment, right? They're like, oh, you do so well with this, I wish you did that, right? So I'm not really bothered by that. There's other things that are a little bit annoying, but I think still important, where we get down to like attorney preferences, where like they like to format it something this way or that way. And that's important. We actually have effectively a dedicated team that's dedicated just to aligning Briefpoint's Word documents with how they like it formatted. And that is like almost like a large part of some people's lives, for better or for worse. But it's a range, right? The way I see it, if you're going horizontal, you're going more wrappery, you're just exposing yourself to an early death. The wrappers, those are not going to survive long.
We've seen that already with Claude Legal and Codex, right? That if you're building like the general foundational model and you're building on their model, like, you know, you're not building your own real estate kind of thing.
I mean,
right?
well, I mean, look, let's talk about what was it, like 2 weeks ago, where Anthropic went after Freshfields. Was it Freshfields? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, I think that's the firm.
It's a huge firm.
That's a UK firm, isn't it?
Yeah,
Or
I should know this. I'm sure it's Magic Circle or whatever. And that is a really important moment in legal tech history.
Yeah.
Because what we had was Anthropic, who is the owner of Claude, selling directly to the customer base of legal tech, who are all trying to sell Anthropic to them too. So we have
a similar version.
Yeah, like we have the suppliers are now directly competing with the distributors. And this isn't some wholesale thing where they say buy a bunch of Claude for a discount, although I'm sure they have a discount. They're going directly after the pain points of the law firm. That's a huge problem, because you can say what you want about Harvey and Legora being, gorillas in the room. Anthropic is King Kong in the room. And it's much harder to compete against that kind of capitalization, especially if you're going broad. And so that was a really important moment, just because it may be an indicator of the future where these distributors are competing against Claude, and we're already competing against Claude.
Right.
Everyone's competing with Claude. Attorneys are. I mean, and that level of competition where you have Silicon Valley money and GDM people going after it, that is a really problematic situation a lot of people will find themselves in, and maybe already are.
Yeah. And so that brings us back to the question we were going down that I wanted to touch on. We've seen this thing happen with pricing, right? I never saw the full pricing model for Harvey, but I remember when they first started, it was evidently really steep per seat, like crazy numbers that I remember hearing. And now, most recently, I heard something more like $1,200 a seat per month. That so? In the legal AI space specifically, are we seeing a reduction in? Is it so competitive right now that we are the trajectory for pricing is it a downward trajectory?
So there's a lot of angles here. Number one, the backdrop. Silicon Valley does not care about profit. They care about market share.
Yep.
And so their VCs are not stopping the startups from doing this. However, we sort of saw this in CLM.
Sure.
And
hugely saturated.
Well, yeah, when I was at Ironclad, I remember, I don't know if this is confidential, I don't really care, but basically we were going after a deal against DocuSign, who was trying to set up this CLM thing. And DocuSign literally said, we'll give you the product for free. And the people said no, they wanted to do Ironclad, right? So when you see price deflation, that's kind of not a great thing, but it's kind of unavoidable at the same time. Because
it just seemed really rapid to me in the AI space.
Right.
I'm sorry.
No, because we want to plug holes. We want to get into firms. We want them to rewrite their policy books, and we want everyone to be trained on solution X, so that 20 years down the line, we're the word perfect, right? We're the thing that people are holding on to, even though it's completely outdated relative to other things. And we want to get there. You want that stickiness, which is a less sort of negative way to phrase that. You want the stickiness. The motivation may in part be due to the competition with straight up Claude, ChatGPT.
Mm-hmm.
Because the calculation that every legal tech company needs to be plugging numbers on is, does the delta in utility between the utility they provide and the utility cloud provide, is that greater than the price difference? That's it, right?
Yep.
And when you get to these very, very capable agentic workflows just right out of the box, where a user can set up something that's not scalable or widely applicable, but they're not an entrepreneur. They have a pain point they need to solve. They can solve that in an afternoon, and if it's not right, they can iterate on it and have another version the same day, same sentence, same minute.
Yeah.
For a legal tech company to iterate and tailor their solution for one person, that is impossible. It's impossible because, number one, if they focus on every user to that degree, they're really focusing on every attorney. There's no way to do that. And even if they were going to do that, even if they say, yep, we're going to have a department called the Pain Point Resolutionists Department, and we're going to go after every person, we're going to vibe code their solutions. You still have to go through front end design. You have to go through designs. You have to do mock-ups. You got to have meetings. You have to do back end. Then QA has to run things. You have to run tests, and then you have to update things. That can take months for one thing. So,
and then it's got to pass security, right?
And then you have security review, right? And so, and security is a big issue, obviously, but I mean, it seems like an easy fix from Anthropic. Like, it seems like they can sort that out. And so, because of that, legal tech really needs to find ways to differentiate themselves. And attorneys may be in the same situation as legal tech soon too, because if your value is the text that you output into a document, and the text is formatted a specific way and it says certain things, and the AI can do that, it's, all that's left is that the client trusts you. And therefore the words that come from you, even if it would be the same from ChatGPT, they're imbued with your trust and like the bar. But how many times are you going to pay for the trust when ChatGPT is giving you the same results every single time?
Yeah.
Like, how long does that last?
So that'll bring us back to Hana. For your learning here, I remember young Nick Rishwain doing interrogatories, right? The form interrogatories as a law clerk. So form interrogatories, Hana, were this horrible idea that the courts came up with that they thought would make things faster. And they don't, because one attorney will ask for all of these things according to the form, and the other attorney will deny all of those things. I'm oversimplifying, I get it. But it's like, here's all these questions that we want answers to. And then we say, but you're not going to get answers to these questions. Oversimplification, but that's what it is. And after about 5 or 6 of these, I go into the partner that I'm working for. I'm like, hey, what's the point of these? And he's like, we just deny everything that they ask for. And he's like, well, it doesn't really supposed to work that way. And I was like, I've done 6 of these.
Yeah.
Like, this is how it's working, man. And so I'm seeing that from day one. That's a specific discovery portion that is just costly waste of time. Maybe it's improved since then, Nathan. I don't know. But that was my experience as to how that is an easily automated process, if you ask me.
Well, I mean, yes and no, right? So form rogs are just interrogatories. Interrogatories are open-ended questions. So it depends on where you find the answer. But I mean, the form rogs, the judiciary made those to try to say, hey, we'll cover most of the grounds of this case, these form rogs to reduce discovery, but now they're just like in addition to your special interrogatories. And so did it help? I don't know.
Interrogatory is just a question, Hana. That's the only thing that word means.
Yeah. And answering them is not simple. I mean, it could be simple, right? Like, who's helping you prepare these answers? The attorney's like, oh, that's me. I'll put in my name. But then, you get a little more complicated. It's like, okay, well, who's at the scene of the incident? Okay, well, where do you get that data? Well, that's going to be testimonial data, or it's in a police report. Probably better if you ask your client to name the people, just in case the police report missed somebody. So there's like, human data, or data in the mind of the human to answer that. So you need to interview the client. And then there's like, what are your total damages? And then you need to go through all your medical records, or if it's your personal injury or the change orders or for construction, whatever it happens to be, calculate everything. Dedupe things as well, because you could have a receipt and an invoice and then a follow-up receipt, and that's the same amount of damages, right? It's a sophisticated process to answer it that is, annoying. That's sort of like, that's why we do it, right? That's why Briefpoint automates it, but painstaking in every situation.
Yeah. So, but that's something you're solving. That is one aspect of what you're solving there.
Yeah. No. Yeah. And that's like when we talk about Briefpoint's defensibility, right? Like, well, why don't I use ChatGPT just to respond to my discovery? I'm like, oh, you can absolutely do that, right? But there are benefits that Briefpoint like provides beyond that, right? We have a system of records, so you can sort of see all the footsteps and like what we did, all the deciding factors. And we're really specialists at the last mile as well, where we're actually like generating the actual Word document. And I know Word is not the deepest mode, but then we're also like communicating with clients. We're like a file repository. We're a system where you can just go to find all the things in one place. And we're just so specialized in discovery that there's really no better solution for it, frankly. And by specializing and going narrow and only focusing on discovery, we can unearth things like client communications, client relationships, like kind of getting into e-discovery in a certain way. We can unearth these things that provide moats. There's 4 big moats in legal tech. Well, 2 big ones and 2 medium ones. The number one is what was yesterday's ruling. That's Damien Reel, who's just incredible. I'm literally Damien Reel's biggest fan. And he always talks about like, okay, what was yesterday's ruling? And there's only 4 companies that really have that in a meaningful way. That's going to be Clio via their Vlex acquisition, Thomson Reuters, Westlaw, and Lexis, and then my friend's Unicorp company, which is really great as well.
Unicorp's great. They were an early guest of the show.
Oh, yes, exactly. Yeah, that fantastic company. Those 4 companies are really the only ones that have the keys to that moat, right?
Yep.
And that's a really deep moat, because in order to get yesterday's ruling, it's more than just scraping data. There's also certain, courts where someone physically has to go in to get the records because they don't have an e-filing system, and they need to, there's a lot of complexity in there that I just don't see large language models ever getting to the point where they can do that. And if they are at that point, then there's like catastrophes and white collar work that go much beyond legal tech generally. And then there's the institutional data moat, where you are like, it's the moat that the attorney has, the value the attorney brings when they're relying on their experience to address something in a specific way. Whether that's
kind of the knowledge management and information governance sort of space.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly. So that falls into it. And then there's also, okay, I know I've been working for this client for 30 years. I know their risk tolerances. So I'm going to propose these things for that. I know that, hey, I have this case, and then 1,000 cases away, there's a similar issue. So I need to make sure that, we're aligning everything so we don't accidentally create bad law. So it largely lives in the head of the attorney, and then for knowledge management, it's actually in like the structure of the work product in the firm. And then leading from that, we have the sort of large repositories where you have tons of documents, right? Tons like e-discovery, where you're going through millions of documents. Token limits the way they are, that is still a moat. And even if you have 1 million tokens, some preliminary testing shows that after 300,000 tokens of processing, things sort of fall off. So even there's practical limits and there's sort of like technological limits, and the practical limits are less. So that's a moat for now, and that depends on how much we can increase LLM's attention, and we may need to do creative things like Claude Code does when it compiles prior responses into these little artifacts that it can catch up on. And then the final mode is the centralized repository, right? Like having a system that's not on, you can have Claude Cowork, sure, but you also have iManage, where you're sharing your documents across your firm. You're going to one place to get the source of truth, and it's being stored on their servers. So those are like
which that one really plays into the knowledge management side as well, right? It's a document management space, but that then also contains all the knowledge of the institution.
Exactly. So like document management system, DMSs, CMSs, I don't see those getting destroyed by LLMs. And so when you saw Harvey and Legora, as far as the client relationship components, like mediums for communication, which is sort of centralized records, you can't automate a communication and have a portal for client communications with GPT. You can't give somebody your GPT credentials and have them look at your chat to get caught up on a case. And so you saw Harvey and Legora actually launch those things because they're trying to build these moats. And so those 4 moats are what we're going to see Harvey and Legora likely do is continue building out those moats. They're going to go into these very tight verticals, and they're going to expand and try to capture all the legal work. And when they're doing that, they're going to be building these barriers that fall into those 4 moats in some way.
Except then they do have, based on your own analysis, they now become more generalized and then at risk to the foundational models.
Yeah, but the problem, again, like with all of those moats that I just said, given the amount of funding that Anthropic and OpenAI have, there's a non-zero chance where they say, we're doing DMS, we're doing all this other stuff, and we're going into verticals. I think these guys are going into verticals hard.
That's my expectation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I had a call with a representative from Anthropic, and I'm not saying anything about Anthropic. I'm not even implying that what they were doing was nefarious. I don't know, but we were on a call, and the representative was trying to encourage usage of Claude. And what they recommended was like, hey, we can get our engineers and they can go through all your prompts and then like give you prompt advice. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a really interesting free service to offer. So
allow me into your proprietary system.
Right. So I'm going to give you like the blueprints for how we're using Claude. I mean, we use Claude not ubiquitously, but in certain situations we do.
We do too.
And while I didn't take them up on that offer, I think many people may. And maybe this isn't even a policy. Again, I'm not saying, I'm just explaining what was happening on that call. But it's conceivable that they may have much deeper access into verticals than we're letting on. Mm-hmm. And given what happened 2-3 weeks ago with Freshfields, they may be executing, with those things benefiting them, but we'll see. The whole point of this is it's a valid business model, and I really think we're just starting to see how deep into legal OpenAI and Anthropic are going to go.
Yeah. Hana, final questions.
So we've been talking about how competitive the industry is, especially with bigger players like Anthropic, Harvey, Legora, and you think Briefpoint's competitive edge is, and with AI, is that competitive edge evolving?
Yeah, I mean, the competitive edge is the point solution, right? All we do is discovery, and we do it better than anybody else in the market. We literally have to survive as a point solution. Yep. And we're priced appropriately. We're priced so that a budget can afford Briefpoint and Harvey. Our business model, we're really following in the footsteps of Slack. And when I think about Slack, I think about Microsoft Teams. Because Microsoft Teams has very similar chat functions as Slack does. And Microsoft Teams is on everyone's computer because it comes with the Office suite. Yet people still use Slack. Why do they do that? Well, number one, it is better than Microsoft Teams at those communications. It's more intuitive. It gets the job done quicker. It's just a better product for that. And number two, it's priced so that you don't need to choose between Microsoft and Slack. In the same sense, Briefpoint, we are just going so deep into discovery, and we're priced at a place where probably 20th of the cost of any other competing product. And our goal is just to get into everybody's door, and we'll be the Slack for legal tech, basically. So that's our competitive edge is also our greatest weakness, really. Because we only do discovery, and people want more. They want to do everything, right? But then that's why some people won't buy Briefpoint. They're like, well, all you do is discovery. I do a bunch of other stuff besides discovery. I'm only doing discovery once a year, but I'm doing trust and estate work most of the time. So yeah, we lose that business. But if people that are doing discovery more than once a year, we're a great solution, and that's where we're going to stay.
In regards to that, and only because you've brought it up, you talked about being a point solution and chances that you would, look for an exit one day. Is e-discovery a good home for Briefpoint?
Yes, so absolutely, because when we get into e-discovery, where we're not processing millions and pages of productions, our automated RFP response generator is generally recommended for 20 to 30,000 pages in production at most. You can certainly go over, and we've had people do that. But when you're getting into a formal e-discovery vendor where you have millions of documents and hundreds of millions of pages, Briefpoint is not the solution for you. I mean, granted, we're 1,000th of the cost and we don't require contractors and it's fully automated. But at that point, we're a fantastic last mile solution where we take the cold production and then distill it into the work product. So e-discovery is a big one. And we have great relationships with Relativity. My co-founder and CTO was a former Relativity engineer. And so we have a great Chicago presence and we love Relativity and the whole team over there is great. Not to say that that's like, we're not getting bought by Relativity tomorrow or anything. It's just,
But it's just evidence of the type of company that would probably be ideal for Briefpoint.
E-discovery is great. All the way to, because we could be like a top of funnel for e-discovery's SMB play, and then obviously the bigger players, right? And at that point, they're like, we can do build or buy, or we can just like hire Briefpoint to be like the discovery people, and then they're just going to chew on that bone for a while. We'll see. We're not at the point where we're actively seeking anything, and we want to get to a place where we've distilled the entire discovery response process to 5 clicks or less. So like from login, like click login, that's 1 click. I want to get there because that is like 100% pain point elimination. Then from there, we'll see where life takes us.
All right. Hana, any last questions?
What has been the challenging part of maintaining and even scaling Briefpoint, and what have you learned from that?
Oh man.
Make it good.
I know, it's a loaded question.
Really make it good.
Heavy hitter.
The challenge is when we were starting, were immediate and incredible existential threats every other week. I don't know if this is okay to say, but I'm going to share it anyway. But basically, before we raised money, we were supposed to close a round, and I'm going to leave out all the party names here, but like,
sure,
we were going to close a round, and it was going to be like, all right, we'll close around in January. And then, through DD, it gets kicked back another month. And I'm talking to some sales hires and some other like hires that we want to bring on, anticipating the close in January. And then it gets kicked, and they're like, hey, I have other job offers. So I was like, all right, screw it. We're definitely closing in February. So let's just hire all these people because we're going to close in February. Well, we didn't close in February, and it got into March, and I get a call from my attorney. They're like, hey, sorry, like they want some more information on here. It's going to be kicked back a week. At that time, we had less than $20,000 in our bank. I think $1,200 in our bank account. Mm-hmm. And we had a $23,000 payroll coming out on Monday, and it was Friday. And so I expressed my frustration, and I'm just like, oh, fuck, oh my God. And then I called my only sales guy, Hunter, who was a paralegal who used Briefpoint. And he just like was like, oh, this product's awesome. He's like, you guys hiring? I was like, sure. That was our first sales hire. It was just a paralegal. I was like, all right, come on in here. Go sell this stuff. Right. And and he's been amazing, honestly, like top performer. And I call him up, and it's like 5 p.m. his time. He's in Charleston. I say, Hunter, I need you to close $20,000 worth of deals. I need $20,000 in the door in the next 3 hours. And I'm like, I don't care what you need to do, fire sale, whatever it is, just sell. I didn't tell him why. I didn't want to freak him out. So he's at the bar calling people. He's closing deals. Like I'm like in an Uber going to like a dinner with a potential investor. I'm texting, trying to close the deals. He closes $21,000 worth of deals that exact night.
Wow.
Got all the money. Payroll gets pulled out. Nobody skips payday. And we closed the round at the end of that week. And if you look at our liquidity chart, like the amount in our bank, it's legitimately goes down, 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 down. And then there's 1 pixel above the X axis. And that's like March, and then boom, all the way up. And we would deal with those existential threats all the time. There's so many times where you're like, oh, okay, this is done. But now those are way less frequent, and there's just so much more momentum where it's like darker a little bit because now we have 20 people working for us, and we need to navigate this thing really carefully because the decisions we make today aren't going to kill us tomorrow, but they may lead to a slow and painful death where we die a year from now. And so there's a lot more weight on the decisions that we make. We don't have a lot of room to sort of wiggle around. And so things, they're more serious now. And that's a challenge, right? Because you want to be this totem pirate ship, but you need to corporatize, and you need to grow up. And when you grow up and a lot of people depend on you for an income, you got to really think about the decisions you make.
Is it hard to go from the guns blazing like that and the chaos of the early days, and I mean, like, the win during that chaos has got to be an incredible high.
Yeah, I mean,
some people thrive on that chaos. Was it hard for you to go from the chaos of the early days to a more corporatized experience?
Yeah, and listen, we're a far cry from corporate. I mean, I'm the CEO. I have a freaking ponytail and a beard. Like, you're not going to get a normal corporate experience looking like me.
Right. Right.
But
that's fair.
Thank you. But is it hard? I mean, I miss the adrenaline a little bit from those sort of just the velocity and everything, and now my back-to-back meetings were just stacked because I was doing all the sales and everything on my own. It was just bam, 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 and you're just exhausted, and I miss that a lot. But it was exhausting, and I think a lot about how to maintain that atmosphere in a larger organization. It's really hard to hold on to that, the things that you love the most about your company. How do you preserve that culture? And you have to do so really thoughtfully.
Yeah, that's good. Let's do last thing here. Is there something we haven't talked about that you think is really important?
Oh, man. I mean,
besides your dashing good looks, obviously, and being dripping with success.
Oh, okay.
Besides
so
those two things. Yeah, avoid those.
Okay, give me a second then. Now, so I think that this is something that I need to work on. And I think it's important for everyone. It's just enjoy this. Try to find a way to enjoy it. There's so much doom and gloom and existential threats, and it's so hard to not look those fears dead in their eyes and focus on what you're doing. And I just think that you can certainly acknowledge those things, but don't let the fear of these competitors and everything guide you. Do not focus on the fear. Look where you want to lead. Keep your focus on where you need to go. Don't ignore the fear. Don't let that fear guide your decisions. We're in a really interesting time, and the things that we can build are really inspiring, especially at the speed and complexity of that. And it's just so important to try to find some good and hold on to that. And don't let yourself go years just dreading everything and worrying. We're at a really cool time, and no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to smell the roses, right?
Yeah. Very good. Very good. Hana, I think that's it. Thank you to Nathan Walter for being our guest. Hana, thank you for being my co-host for the first full episode.
Yeah, this is fun.
We'll have to have you on again, Nathan, when you have something really cool to share, or your exit takes place, or whatever happens. I invite you to come back in the future.
Nick, honestly, I'm so happy to do that. Honored to be on here. I've honestly it's been so great knowing and working with you for these last couple of years. I'm really honored to be able to spend some time with you on one-on-one and chat. I hope to see you soon.
I've enjoyed it. So thank you. And Hana, I think we can end now.